shouldn't shock you that right after FTX's collapse, every major bank in this country announced a new partnership with the New York Fed to establish a new digital currency. Oh, digital currency, the one they can regulate and control. Citigroup, Wells Fargo, MasterCard, HSBC, all working on a 12-week digital dollar pilot. The Fed describes this project as a regulated liability network. So what does this mean long term? Well, if they have control of your money because it's digital, you can't stash it under your bed. If they don't like what you say, they can turn it off and you're impoverished. In other words, this whole thing is a bigger scam even than it seems, and it was made possible by political sloganeering.
The Chinese last month unveiled the world's first digital currency from a major power. Currency that would not be printed but would exist only in cyberspace on your phone, for example. Is the Fed working on a digital dollar?
We are actually evaluating that. Most major countries are now looking at the possibility of having a digital currency.
As your attention is drawn elsewhere, governments across the globe are undertaking remarkable endeavors.
You should know that central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are about to become the norm in Europe. The president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, has just said that Europeans will not be able to use more than $1,000 in cash anymore.
Now we have in Europe this threshold. Above 1,000 euros, you cannot pay cash. If you do, you are on the gray market. So you take your risk. You get caught, you are fined, or you go in jail.
What is really happening here? The deeper I delved into the mystery, the more captivated I became by the world of Central Bank Digital Currencies, or CBDCs. Truth is, it's a wide world out there, and I think it's time that you and I finally take a step into the realm of central bank digital currencies and begin to make sense of it all.
China is about to launch one of the most revolutionary financial projects in the world.
They're not cryptocurrencies. They're not so-called stable coins. In effect, they are the national physical currency of a country, just represented in a digital form.
A central bank digital currency, or a CBDC, is a story about the very thing that influences our actions today. The piece of paper we call money, or the numbers on the screen in your bank account. But if you go back in time far enough, you'll find that our ancestors purchased goods with a method we won't recognize today. Payment first began with barter, a system which involved trading goods for other goods. A few apples for a cup of milk, a wagyu steak for a bunch of lettuce. But this system had a problem. It relied on us wanting what the other person had. It relied on mutual benefit. So our ancestors realized that we needed a medium of exchange to represent the value of items they wanted to buy, such as seashells, cattle, and eventually precious metal coins. Then thousands of years later, countries started using paper money that was backed by gold. In other words, the dollar would be backed by a certain amount of gold, and you could theoretically exchange those dollars for physical gold that a country held in its reserves. This system was known as the gold standard. This system, however, the US officially left the gold standard along with many other countries. This meant that the dollar was no longer backed up by gold. The dollar was simply backed on the basis that the government decreed that it had value, and we all agree it does. Doing this allowed governments and central banks to have more control over our money supply, making it easier to use monetary policy to respond to times of financial crisis. This type of money, the money we use today, which is no longer backed by gold, but rather the faith in the government, is known as the fiat money. The important thing to realize here is that this system relies on the trust in the government. But what if you don't have that trust? Where do you turn to? Bitcoin, a decentralized digital currency invented by a person or a group of people under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. It operates on a peer-to-peer network, meaning transactions occur directly between users without the need for intermediaries like banks. Here is where things get a little bit confusing. How is it exactly decentralized? Understanding Bitcoin is the key to understand the fanaticism around the central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, that we see today from different governments around the world. Think of Bitcoin as simply transactions on a ledger. For example, let's say Kevin pays 3 Bitcoins to Mary and Mary pays 2 Bitcoins to John. These transactions are in fact recorded on a ledger. Banks work in a similar way, recording each and every transaction made through a bank account using their own system, making sure that each and every transaction made is in fact valid. In other words, the bank makes sure that an individual who has $1,000 in their bank account cannot spend any more than that amount. Bitcoin, however, is intended to be decentralized. So how could it possibly verify that the transactions made on its ledger are in fact legit? That Kevin has even 3 Bitcoin to pay to Mary in the first place. This is where the concept of peer-to-peer network or distributed ledger comes in. Instead of a central authority that controls all Bitcoin transactions, the ledger is instead distributed amongst a network of computers known as nodes. When a transaction is made on the ledger, every computer on the Bitcoin network will attempt to validate if the transaction is legitimate by solving complex algorithms. When a consensus is reached on the network and the transaction is valid, it will be permanently stored on the ledger. If a single node on the network attempts to validate an incorrect transaction, all the other nodes on the network will be rejected. And after a certain amount of transactions are made on the ledger, a new ledger or a block is created that contains a type of code known as a hash that links back to the previous ledger. This is why it is known as a blockchain, and no public identities are used when transacting on a Bitcoin blockchain. In other words, it is a decentralized form of currency that doesn't rely on trust between parties for transactions to occur.
CBDCs are the next level, because once the money's completely digital, then they control everything you do with it. They control where it goes, but they can also control how and when it can be spent. Imagine some terrible future dystopian society where your money arrives and they say it can only be spent on food, or it can only be spent on vegetables because you've had too much meat this week. Or you can't buy transport to a particular area because there's resistance to government oppression in that area. So your money won't work for trains right now because nobody can go down there, because we don't want everyone in a large group. We want everyone at home in their pods.
Aside from the basic programmability that a central bank digital currency would offer for social and political control, one of its main common features is the ability to pay both positive and negative interest rates to curb and spur purchases. That is, the government provider of a central bank digital currency could easily put money directly into a citizen's account and just as easily take the money out, ultimately implementing such negative interest rate penalties depending on there being no alternative payment method for consumers, which is one reason that governments introducing central bank digital currencies have been banning cryptocurrencies. But it's not just the third-party competitors that will need to be removed. Central bankers cannot implement negative interest rates with central bank digital currencies if people can still switch to cash. In fact, eliminating cash and other monetary alternatives is precisely what many central bank digital currencies proponents call for.
Well, if you've ever wondered about some passages in the Bible, how can a government restrict the population so that you cannot buy or sell unless you have a particular mark. Well, this is the answer. We're literally being set up for that kind of government control.
The story doesn't end here. The future of central bank digital currency is still being written, and the choices that we make today will have impact on our lives. Will central bank digital currencies pave the way for a more inclusive financial system, or will they be a tool for financial control and surveillance? Join us in the next chapter as we explore the evolving landscape of central bank digital currencies and answer the questions that still remain unanswered. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up and let me know in the comments down below how you found this video. And don't forget to subscribe. It's a free way to support this channel, this community. And with all that being said, I will see you and catch you in the next one. Ciao.